Hey everybody, welcome to Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Today we're looking at a classic TV episode from the Disneyland TV show. First broadcast December 28th, 1955. This episode is called Man and the Moon. Season 2, episode 14. It was preceded in a series of episodes about space exploration by Man in Space and then followed by, I should say, Mars and Beyond. And I might do the Mars and Beyond episode at a later date. For now, I wanted to look at this one because it's a really fascinating episode. Futurism was a big deal with Walt Disney back in the day. That's what Tomorrowland was dedicated to. That's what Epcot Center was dedicated to. How we're going to do things in the future. It was an idea of, well, kind of based on what you might find in a World's Fair back in the day. Different companies showing off technologies they're working on. So, okay, projecting a little bit, trying to figure out what things might look like. Does that mean they're going to get it quite right? No. But making the attempt and grounding things in reality. If you look at, say, Tomorrowland and Disneyland Park today, you have an attraction like Space Mountain. You have an attraction like Star Tours. Well, it feels like it. It's science fiction type stuff. It goes there. Well, Walt Disney might not have thought so. Exactly. No, not that he wouldn't have maybe done those, but he was trying to really look at what the future was going to look like for humanity. So this episode, 1955, is taking a look based very strictly on what was being planned at what America's space program was going to look like in the future. It was already starting to shape up with satellites and things like that. But here we're talking about human beings venturing into space and traveling to the moon. Really heady stuff. So we'll take a look at this. Now, the opening images are in black and white, and I think they were just tagged on to the video that I watched. But I wanted to show them off anyways because it was such a cool TV show back in the day. So let's take a look, and then we'll talk a little bit about the, a little bit more about the episode as we go. All right, so Disneyland, the episode starts showing you images of the different lands in Disneyland. This was the concept behind this TV program. Disneyland was split up into different lands, and so the Disneyland TV program would cover different subjects based on those different lands. So again, Frontierland, which would get into, Westerns and exploration and the American frontier. Tomorrowland, looking at the future. Adventureland, exotic places around the world. So kind of leaving America for, well, think about Adventureland and Disneyland, the Jungle Cruise, things of that nature. And Fantasyland, which is all about fairy tales and really a lot of the traditional fare that Disney was known for, the Disney princesses, that kind of thing. So tonight, Tomorrowland and Man and the Moon. So, of course, the episode is introduced to us by Walt Disney himself. And right back there, you see an aerial of Disneyland as it was in 1955 in the early days. Miss old school Disneyland very, very much. I miss Walt Disney quite a bit as well. And so he shows a picture of the rocket to the, it wasn't a rocket to the moon, but it was like a rocket into space ride that they had. I remember getting to go on that. I was amazed by it. You had like this big video thing on the floor. So as you launched, you'd see like Earth getting further and further away as you went up into space. I think the rocket was supposed to be TWA. Because again, they're trying to say, look, these are things maybe we'll actually get to do in the future. It wasn't just pure science fiction. And then he throws it to the great Ward Kimball, who directed this episode and was also one of the writers. And Ward begins with an animated sequence telling the story of man's relationship to the moon over the millennia. And of course, the animation design here is superb. I could have shown so many more images from this, and you might go, you're showing too many. Fine, I don't care. They're gorgeous, and they should be seen, and you should go watch the episode in full, because as much as I am showing, I ain't showing it all. And just a side note here, 1955 is the year that Walt Disney released Lady and the Tramp. So if you want to see like a movie, the movie animation from about the same period, you could see it there. Now, this is more, this is a different style. This is maybe a little bit like what you got from United Artists at the time. It's where styles of animation were starting to change. So we go back to the moon, looking down on the formation of life on Earth. And then we see briefly the dinosaurs, and then the arrival of human beings. And the animation here is in the style of cave paintings. Very, very cool stuff. So we get primitive man's perceptions of the moon as a personality, seeing in it the face of a man or a woman, a four-eyed leopard, apparently that is from some story. And they talk about their perceptions of the moon's ability to change its shape. The Hindu belief that it was a lamp, for the Aegeans, a silver shield. Then we talk about moon worship with the Sumerians. We see the Egyptians and Thoth. We see, of course, the Greeks and Romans. We hear about the fear of eclipses, that it's like a demon swallowing the sun or covering up and putting us into darkness. And then we hear about the first book devoted to the moon by Plutarch, in which he theorized it was just a smaller version of Earth, but populated by demons. We then get Lucian's tale of a visit to the moon by a ship in 161 AD, the first science fiction story, perhaps. The Renaissance propaganda about the Dark Ages is in full display here. The Dark Ages, people were very ignorant all of a sudden. They really weren't, but that's kind of what later people thought. But it's such a cool image that I had to share it with you. And then we get Galileo's observations of the moon. It has mountains, it has seas. And then Kepler's imaginative story of being kidnapped while sleeping by moon demons during an eclipse. They use the moon's shadow as a bridge, a very D&D kind of concept, to get to Earth. And once there, he discovers or encounters a moon creature. And then other science fiction stories and their imaginary ways of actually getting to the moon. In this one, a man uses birds that fly apparently to the moon. That was the belief. And so he hooks up a device that gets him to fly there. And he meets moon people who vary in size according to rank, and whose only language is music. And then Cyrano de Bergerac's ideas on the subject. And you notice how they change the style with each of these different relations. The account of Sir John Herschel discovering life on the moon using a powerful new telescope. But alas, it was a hoax. Jules Verne sends men to the moon in essentially an artillery shell. There are references to the moon in Shakespeare. Moon myths and superstitions are covered, with some seriously cool art in this sequence. And then we conclude with this romantic song about the moon, in June and you swoon and blah, 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 showing couples from around the world. This one of the Soviets actually really killed me. And the Americans look like they're having more fun here. And so we end the animated sequence. But it's really, really beautifully done and well worth watching. Great style to it. You should check this out for that, if nothing else. But there is so much more else to look at. So we kick it back to Ward, who tells us about the Earth and Moon being tiny specks in a universe with billions and billions of stars. Kind of looks like a used car salesman here trying to sell me a galaxy. Anyways. And then we get an explanation of the solar system. And this is actually some, kind of new information to a lot of people. As people were starting to get interested in space and beyond the moon, a lot of people didn't know like the difference between a galaxy and a universe and a solar system. And you get that in a lot of old sci-fi TV, where they really kind of get these terms mixed up. And truth be told, you'll find people still getting this kind of thing mixed up. So we kind of get a little lesson on this. We get a lesson on how the Earth and Moon might have originally formed, how the moon phases work, how eclipses work, how the moon causes the tides, all very nicely animated. And then on to the moon's surface. There's no atmosphere, etc. Of course, no seas. And then we throw it to Wernher von Braun. Yes, this is the guy who worked with the Razzies back in the day, but those were the guys who also knew how rockets worked, and we were sort of in a race with the Soviets. And believe me, the Soviets, they had some intention of weaponizing space. It was important to keep pace with them. So he was the chief of the guided missile development at the United States Army's Redstone Arsenal. And you see him standing beside this absolutely incredible looking rocket. And so he's going to describe a little bit of how our whole space program is going to work, how we're going to do all this stuff that we want to do. And so he talks about a journey to the moon will take 2 phases. And this was fundamentally how they thought things were going to work at the time. First, a rocket ship takes off from Earth, and it's going to go into orbit, awaiting refueling by cargo rockets launched from Earth. The 2-phase concept did last a long time before they finally had rockets improved to the point where they could get from Earth to the moon in one shot. Okay, so keep in mind, this is stuff that didn't actually happen, but it really was planned. This is really how they thought it was going to work. Would have been very expensive. So figuring out a better way and a faster way, again, to beat the Soviets to the moon, was very important. So the refueling would involve a space station. Okay, so again, look at this absolutely amazing model of a space station, and it does rotate. They're going to show you some really cool stuff here. And you notice, like in old movies and old TV shows from the 50s, this is standard. The wheel in space, you get it in Rocky Jones, you get it in Man into Space, a lot of different movies. Space, also 2001 Space Odyssey, I should say. And maybe one day we'll actually build one of these things. And so he's showing off the different parts of it. Communications array, there's going to be nuclear power on it, airlock entry down at the bottom there. Well worth watching if you're a sci-fi fan, especially retro sci-fi. You get some really good ideas of how you could develop one of these if you're running like a role-playing game or something like that. And then the plan they show is absolutely beautiful. I can only pray that this still exists somewhere on Earth, that it was preserved, because it's amazing. It's full size. You'll see in the next image a little bit more of it, but it rotates. So he's kind of showing you, because obviously the idea is we get this thing spinning fast enough, you get artificial gravity on the outside. Okay, so everybody's going to be standing kind of like, there we go, kind of standing like this, because that outside edge is where the gravity is going to be, or at least the fake gravity. No, we're not talking about like artificial gravity like you'd get in Star Trek or something. We're talking about centrifugal force, essentially. So they go through all the different sections of this thing, and you see a bigger version of this, or what it really looks like from further away. You got to watch this thing. It's incredible. I can't really do justice to this. And then we get this look at these little pod vessels. Now they refer to them as spacesuits. Okay. And you can kind of see the little bubble up at the top there. You see a person's head. Okay. So there's going to be a person inside of this thing. And these are going to be used in constructing, really reassembling the space station, because it's going to, the parts are going to be built on the ground. They're going to be shipped up, these rockets, and then these guys are going to use these things to reassemble these things in space. They're a little reminiscent to me of the little worker bees that you saw in Star Trek, the motion picture. Different shape, but the same concept with the little arms and stuff like that can do the work. And here we see some of the arms extended on it. And it also reminds you a little bit of the probe droid from Empire Strikes Back. So you can see that not only are things like this kind of creating a design language, an aesthetic for space exploration, but you can see this thing kind of echoes further on, even in something like Star Wars that, doesn't have that same minimalist approach to design that you get with something like Star Trek. But yeah, some of these ideas, they resonate through. So he shows how the passenger segment on that rocket had those little wings and stuff, can be replaced with a cargo segment. Okay. And so this is an unmanned rocket. And so the idea is, and here we see a better look at that passenger rocket. it would already be in orbit, having gone up with another rocket. Now, you saw the size of that rocket, so you can imagine the expense involved in putting all of this together. So this already in orbit is going to guide the sections, the cargo sections, into place. And they do the whole thing illustrated with these really beautiful paintings that are set up in a row. So they go camera, from one to the other. And so, again, absolutely amazing art. You expect that from Walt Disney back in the day. And all of this now that they're doing is going to come to life in just a few minutes, because the last section of this thing is live action and really, really cool. And so it's not just beautiful illustration. Of course, this is how this is actually going to work. You see the guys doing a spacewalk with their, the ropes kind of tying them to things. And what they do is they take this rocket, and they're getting one of those spacesuits out of this cargo section. Okay. And so every 24 hours, they're going to launch another one of these things up. The rockets arrive with each section of the space wheel. And essentially it's like they kind of take this thing out and they inflate it. And then they attach these metal panels to it to protect it from little meteorites. Because again, this is reality. This isn't like, a meteor shower. We got little tiny, tiny, tiny rocks flying around up there, right? Now, they don't hit the Earth because they can't make it through our atmosphere. But anything up there, they can. And I think we did recently have one of our little space stations, we'll call it, up there, get a little bit of a leak from one of those things. So this is a real problem that they had to worry about. And so they're going to then take those sections and they're going to connect them together. Okay. And it's just an amazing concept. And it is, technically it's realistic. They could do exactly this stuff nowadays. It's just too expensive. It doesn't really serve the purpose they thought they were going to need. And here's where they're attaching the part that, maybe a little bit less realistic looking back. This would be the atomic power plant that was going to keep this thing going. Now, at a certain point, atomic energy was kind of outlawed in space. At least atomic bombs were, but you could see where, maybe something like that would be a problem as well. It could be used to kind of create maybe atomic bombs in space. And so there were, it's like a nuclear non-proliferation in space thing. So some of this stuff fell away because of that. And von Braun then explains that the first trip to the moon will be a scouting mission. It's going to orbit the moon. It'll see the dark side for the first time. And it's going to test equipment and building skills for moon landings and trips further into the solar system. So this is going to be our first thing. Are you ready for the first moon rocket that's going to orbit? Because I got to be honest with you, it is way cooler than what we actually got. Boom. Look at that thing and look at the model work. Absolutely gorgeous. Now, those tanks around there are fuel, and they at a certain point would be jettisoned. Okay, so that's what that stuff is there. But the main section is where the people would be. And it's not as big as it looks here. You notice sticking out from the bottom of it, you have one of those space suits. The idea is they kind of dock. So you crawl into it, go out, you got little jets that you can move around, and then you move back in, dock, and you get back out. So he's going to go through the different sections, the different parts. The thing on the nose is a small atomic reactor. Atomic power, man, that was the future. That was what we were going to use. And maybe we still will, but that was believed. You're going to need something like that to generate enough electricity for this. Of course, we found other ways to generate electricity for the spacecraft that we put up there. But that was the thinking at the time. So here we get to the best part of the program. A live action reenactment of that first voyage around the moon. Impeccable model work, some really cool special effects, and probably the best special effects you're going to see for a long time. Probably the most complex you're going to see until Star Trek rolls around about a decade later. Okay, so it begins with a shot of Space Station number 1, where preparations have all been made for this launch. And then we pan from the space station to the moon rocket with one of those little pod vessels having launched from one to the other. And then we get a close-up of the pod. They refer to it again as a spacesuit, actually docking. Okay, and then we see the view from the inside. So here it is docked. This conical thing comes up on a hinge. They pop open the bubble so the guy can get out. So this is really cool. This is like a scale model, or not scale model. This is a life-size model of what they thought the interior of the rocket was going to look like. Okay. Now, the man who docked is the captain of the vessel. He's going to command the mission from the front of the ship. Now, the role is played by Frank Gersel. You have seen this guy in a lot of old TV shows. Usually plays kind of a rough, tough, kind of heavy in things. Usually a bad guy. The other crew played by Richard Emery, Frank Connor, and Leo Needham. And notice on his shoulder, so you got the flight suit kind of uniform. He's wearing that patch. RM1 is what it says. It's a very cool design. I wonder if they've ever sold something like that in the Disney store. Who knows? I mean, they monetize almost everything there. The navigator sits right behind him. And in this shot, you can see you can just barely make out a pin that's floating. So they're trying to simulate the zero gravity. But of course, these guys aren't like flying all the way through here or anything like that. The radio operator is next. He's like just right behind the navigator, I want to say. Or no, he's not. He's behind the navigator. So you notice the controls they're showing. Probably not based on what real controls would have looked like at the time. They probably had to make a lot of guesswork there. Now, right next to him is the flight engineer. So we got captain, command, navigation, communications, and engineering. It's not like, wow, it's kind of like on Star Trek. Look, this was all based on, modern day aircraft and how they operated, modern day naval vessels and how they operated. All of these things were trying to bring that reality forward. Keep in mind, you're also in the 1950s. So most American men, because of the draft, had served in some form of the military. This was all kind of familiar to them, this sort of stuff. And you notice on their helmets, they have like a visor. Does not really come into play in this thing. I thought it was kind of cool looking. And so here's a shot you see from forward. There's the captain, and you see how everybody's sort of arranged behind him. And then from behind, you see kind of the same thing. You see this is not a very big space. And that little cone right there in the middle, that's that docking station that we saw a little earlier. So we get the countdown to blast off, although the numerals would probably look a little bit different in the future, but okay. Well, I don't know what year this would be, somewhere in the late 1960s. It probably wouldn't look quite like that, but I mean, again, they're having to make all this stuff up. And then we get the blast off. Really interesting effect. They essentially use like this sort of translucent plastic in the shape of that rocket thing. And it's there when the thing is moving. And then when it stops, it disappears. So, kind of like not exactly stop motion, but you get the idea. And from another angle, we see, again, great special effects here, but we see it moving off. And you're going to see images like this, similar to this with the planet in Star Trek. Not done quite exactly the same way, but really incredible stuff. And so now we zoom in on it, and we see the captain there sitting in that cockpit. I'll bet actual astronauts wished they had something as comfortable as this. It's a little reminiscent, actually, of the space shuttle and how that worked, which, wasn't, well, I mean, if you looked at that one, the one image from earlier of the passenger segment that they were going to use, a little bit like a space shuttle. I don't know if it was something designed for re-entry, but it kind of looks like it was because of the wings. You don't need, obviously, wings in space. And so what follows is kind of technical, as it's meant to demonstrate an actual moon launch. It's not a dramatic story. I mean, it'd be dramatic for it to happen in reality, and it was when it really did happen. But this is kind of like Dragnet in a way. We're trying to get to the facts here. So a lot of figures that these guys are saying as they're counting down this, and they're checking this, and they're checking that. And some of the equipment's kind of cool. They have an optical star tracker to help with navigation. So here's where they're sort of, focusing it in on those crosshairs. The little white dots that are on there, they kind of move to the middle to make sure that they're actually going to, be on course. You get the idea. You get this elapsed time tracker, which reminds me a little bit of the one from the old Star Trek episodes, All Our Yesterdays. So you can see, again, continuity of design in a lot of this stuff. And then, of course, we see some scenes of zero gravity living, because obviously it's going to take several days for them to get there. Once they're more or less on track, there's not that much more for them to do. So, one of them's eating, a couple of them, I believe, were playing cards, really nice stuff, really relaxed. And oh my God, all of a sudden there's an emergency 2. And again, this is also a little reminiscent of, the Star Trek thing, because there's a klaxon and there's the, kind of, reddish light, flashing, which I think would actually be terrible for an emergency if you're trying to get things done. So a meteor has in fact hit one of the fuel tanks and the pressure is dropping. So again, meteors, you get that in sci-fi all the time, but this is not like the meteor shower with the huge fake rocks flying by. It's a tiny one, but it puts a hole in that fuel tank, and this is very important. So the captain orders somebody, as he puts it, into the bottle suit to go out and patch this hole because they are losing their fuel. So during the repair, you see a little bit of stop motion of a tiny model moving the arm. And then they get into a full-sized model of the suit with the guy inside of it. And he, one of the arms extends. And the idea behind those arms is each one has different tools on it that they're going to need for what they're doing out there. And so this thing kind of pops in and pop. Okay, covers up the leak. And then they proceed on their flight plan. And eventually they reach the moon. And again, reminiscent of shots of the Enterprise entering orbit around planets. And we get an interesting little device that looks like a rotary phone. But they're getting altitude readings, they're getting navigational readings. And then they have to fire the rockets at one point to course correct and avoid a collision with the moon. So they got to, get into a standard orbit. Pretty standard stuff, but the special effects are so nicely done here. I mean, look at the moon. It looks very real. They take film of the moon's surface from the two sort of those bubble canopies that are on either side of the rocket. And so, so they can get some actual film of the thing. And the imagery of the moon moving underneath there and this guy floating, very reminiscent to the real thing. If you've ever watched video of the astronauts looking through, I guess you could call it a porthole or what have you, on a, real spaceship looking at Earth or what. I mean, we don't get that of the moon really that much anymore because we don't send people there, but of the Earth. So it's very well done. It doesn't look that different from what really happened. And then, of course, they're going to orbit, so they're going to reach the dark side of the moon. And in this case, the dark side is actually the dark side. It's going to be actually cloaked in night while they go around it. I think they wanted to show how you might actually get a look at the moon's surface when you have no light from the sun. And in fact, what they're going to use is flares. So here we see the moon moving below them as they go through the daylight terminator. They're passing overhead. And then this little thing opens up and there are flares in there, almost look kind of like rockets. And you can sort of see the trail of one of those flares shooting off. And when the thing gets further down, it illuminates part of the surface. So they're filming all of this while they do it. Now this part is really cool. Okay. Because it's maybe a little bit less realistic, but they pick up some odd radiation readings and they send a flare down and they see this. That doesn't look natural. Has somebody already visited the dark side of the moon? Maybe another Okay, they're teasing the possibility. What if we find that extraterrestrials have been to the surface of the moon? I don't think they're assuming this was, built by Cyrano to Bergerac when he was there. Really cool stuff. You get an episode in Men into Space where they do a little bit of that too, kind of teasing, is there something out there? Is there something maybe trying to communicate with us, maybe not communicating with us, but eventually they pass back to where they can see Mother Earth. It's really, really well done. And here's what the view of that looks like from the cockpit. And so now they're heading back to Earth. It's a 5-day journey. And when they get where they're going, they flip over so they could fire the braking rockets. And so here you see them sort of upside down. They're getting back into the space station's orbit. This is them jettisoning those empty fuel tanks that they don't need anymore. And then they're home. And of course, the next mission will be in moon landing, which we wish we'd gotten to see that version. And the last thing we see of this segment is the atomic-powered rocket that is under construction that will journey to Mars. This stuff is like, crack to me. It is. I just eat this stuff up. I actually did a role-playing game supplement for a game I did kind of about the retro future and, all the things that were designed but never actually built. And what would life have been like if it was? And I hadn't seen this at the time, and boy, do I wish I had, because I probably would have at least tried to incorporate some of the ideas. So very, very cool stuff. And then we go back to a black and white segment of next week, Disneyland will be coming to us from Fantasyland. And they actually do a whole bit on the Fantasyland segment. I think it had to do with Henry VIII. We're not going to look at that. So produced and directed by Ward Kimball. And we get a few credits here, written by William Bosch, or maybe it's Bochet, John Dunn, Ward Kimball, music, George Bruns. You get the idea here. Now, the one name that I really, really, really want to bring out here, Iwerks in there for special processes. So, special effects, you assume. Wathel or Wathel, I'm not sure how you pronounced it. Rogers did the models. And I mean, those things are absolutely beautiful. I've watched this a few times just so I can look at them. God, I wish I could have actually seen him up close and in person. Here's a shot I found of Rogers. He also did animatronics for Disneyland. Amazing stuff. This guy did just an incredible job. And if you're into mid-century modern design, if you're into space travel, if you're into science, if you're into science fiction, if you're just into Disney, go find this sucker. It is absolutely beautiful. I wanted to show this off too while I'm doing this. Conquest. Well, let me get it. No, maybe not that close. The Conquest of Space. Chesley Bonestell did the art. Villele. This is from 1951, so 4 years before this was done. That goes into a lot of stuff with some really beautiful art, but it also is trying to explain how the science of this stuff is going to work. Now, Chesley Bonestell will also do paintings to illustrate a series in Collier's magazine that if you love this stuff, you want to find this segment from Collier's. I guess I can bring this down now at this point. That goes through all the stuff that they're describing here with absolutely beautiful artwork. It's an amazing time to be alive. It was that promise of the future, much of which we did actually achieve differently than they thought we were going to achieve it, but that we did achieve. They weren't yet looking at potential downside and all that other stuff. Really cool stuff. Like I said, they made a couple other episodes about our journeys into space and going to Mars and beyond. Great stuff. Well worth watching. If you've never watched any of those Disneyland programs or Wonderful World of Disney, etc., you can find some of them out there. Great stuff. It's something I grew up with. Although, not this particular thing. I don't think I ever saw that until I was an adult. So there we have it, folks. Let me know what you think of Man and the Moon from the Disneyland program. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this stuff, on space travel, just on the artistry alone. It is worth looking at for the artistry alone. If you enjoyed this little review, this little glimpse at this beautiful thing, maybe give this video a like, maybe subscribe to my channel. I cover all sorts of pop culture. Maybe think of sharing with a friend if you think somebody else out there might enjoy this. I would really appreciate that. It helps my little channel to grow. But until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. Watch Man and the Moon. And I will see you hopefully again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.